So it has been a really busy year in the Mash IT studio for laptop reviews. We've already reviewed the Razer Blade 16 and the Razer Blade 18. But as Razer has decided to put these two in completely different directions, today we wanted to put them head to head. Now for the 2023 and 2024 Blade 16s and Blade 18s, they were very similar. But now in 2025, Razer have completely redesigned the Blade 16, making it a much slimmer and lighter design. Whereas for the 18, Razer have actually made their Blade 18 bigger and heavier than previous Razer Blade 18s, making this quite an interesting comparison. Now we couldn't get the specs exactly the same between these two. We've actually got the 5090 version of the Blade 16 and the 5080 version of the Blade 18. But unfortunately with the Blade 16, if you go anything under that top end spec, you're also getting a lower end CPU configuration. Now we will be getting in a 5070 Ti Blade 16 very soon, so keep an eye out for that review. But for the moment, although the prices are similar between these two, you've actually got the higher end GPU on the Blade 16. So before we put them head to head, let's run down the specs on the screen. But the Blade 16 has the Ryzen chip, the Blade 18 has the Intel chip, we've got a 5090 in the 16, we've got a 5080 in the 18, we've got 32 gigabytes of RAM on both, though the Blade 16 we're talking soldered, 18 we're talking upgradable, and we've got a 1 terabyte SSD on both of these machines. Now let's look at the actual externals. Straight away, put them side by side, and you can see what a massive difference in size between these two machines. The Blade 18 looks monstrous next to the new slimmed down Blade 16. There's a lot of difference in thickness, and if I put one on top of the other, there is a lot of difference in just desk real estate with the 16 versus the 18. I mean, look at that. That's an incredible difference in size. With regards to the weight, let's just quickly weigh them both. Starting off with the Blade 16, that's 2.1 kilograms. Then moving to the big boy, the Blade 18, 3.1 kilogram. So an entire kilogram difference between these two laptops. So you can see how much they've slimmed down the 16 versus the 18. Now when it comes to ports, on the Blade 16, on the right side, you've got the HDMI 2.1, a USB-A port, a USB 4 port, and a full-size SD card slot. And on the left side, we've got the power jack, another two USB-A, another USB 4, and the headset jack. Whereas on the Blade 18, on the right side, HDMI 2.1, USB-A, and a Thunderbolt 4, and then we've got the full-size SD card slot. And then on the left side, power jack, Ethernet slot, another two USB-As, and a Thunderbolt 5 port with the headset jack. So you are getting an Ethernet port and USB 5 on the Blade 18, whereas you're just getting USB 4 on that much slimmer and lighter Blade 16. So connectivity is definitely better on that Razer Blade 18. And something else I want to point out before we get any further is the fact that on the actual Blade 16, both of those USB 4s are connected to the integrated GPU. There's no ports connected to the dedicated GPU. Whereas on the actual Razer Blade 18, one of the ports is connected to the actual Intel and one of the ports is connected to the NVIDIA. This means if you've got an external monitor that has G-Sync, you can go direct to the GPU with this model. And if you've got a VR headset, again, direct to the GPU, you cannot do that with the actual Blade 16. The only option you've got is the HDMI port, which can cause problems for you. So ports aside, they've both got the lit Razer logo on the lids. If we look underneath on the Blade 16, you can see that we've got the thermal shelf, which allows this laptop to get so thin, but still have decent fans and vapor chambers in here. Whereas on the Blade 18, when we look underneath, we have the thermal shelf with that lovely window in and RGB lighting, which no one will ever see. Right, so now we've looked around these laptops, let's open them up. And I do want to mention that both of these come in the same milled aluminium chassis, so they're both built like tanks, but they are both complete and utter fingerprint magnets. These were cleaned a second ago, and you can see straight away, we've already got fingerprints everywhere. So let's open them up and take a look inside. So opening up the laptops and looking at the palm rest, and the first thing you'll notice, again, the lovely milled aluminium palm rest and the trackpad. Now you'll notice that the Blade 18 and the Blade 16 have very similar sized trackpads. Now last year, the Blade 18 had a much bigger trackpad than the Blade 16, but it's so big, it actually often gets in the way. I still think this trackpad is still too big, and on the Blade 16, it's just way too big. Also, there have been a number of users that have had issues with the touchpad this year on the Blade 16, though I've not had any issues with the model that I have. Now, as we move up to the keyboard, there's quite a big difference between these two models. First thing you'll notice is the Razer Blade 18 does get a number pad, whereas the Blade 16 does not. Instead, the Blade 16 gets some multimedia sort of hotkeys and macro keys at the end underneath the power button. Now, I do quite like this. I particularly like the mute mic and the switch profiles, which has been really useful. But the cursor keys, as usual with Razer blades, do have the crushed in sort of up and down arrows, which I know a lot of people dislike. Even if you've got the large one with the number pad, you still get those same cursor keys. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of a number pad on a laptop. I much prefer a sort of keyboard in the middle. But with the Razer Blade 18s, if you switch the number lock on, you obviously get the numbers. Then if you switch it the other way, you get the dedicated macro keys that you get pretty much on the Blade 16. I particularly like, again, turn off the microphone, turn off the actual trackpad if you want to, and switch your profiles. Really useful keys that I use a lot of the time. So I actually have quite enjoyed having those keys there on this model. Another thing you'll notice with both of these, which you'll have seen hopefully if you've watched the reviews already, when you press shift, you get secondary lighting on both these. So if you look at the keys here, by default, you're seeing the numbers and everything. As we press the shift, it actually lights up all your secondary characters. And the same on the Blade 16. And then when you press the function key down, it sort of highlights all the keys that can be utilized with the function key. Again, same with the Blade 16. Really love this feature on both the Blade 16 and the Blade 18 this year. Now, I got the Blade 14 in and I was disappointed in the fact that they've left the old keyboard on that, so you do not get the dual lighting on the 14. I ended up being so annoyed with the 14, I returned it. Now, either side of the keyboards, you can see the grills for the speaker systems. They both have a 6-speaker systems, and they sound like this. Audio test of the Razer Blade 16 versus the Razer Blade 18, with the Razer Blade 16 on the left and the Razer Blade 18 on the right, and we're going to start at 50% audio, starting with the Razer Blade 16. Well, I think we can fairly say that's not even close. The Razer Blade 18 is louder, it's punchier, it's got more bass, and it just sounds so much better. And then as we move up to the screens, this is something that's very, very different between these two laptops. The Razer Blade 16 has a 240Hz 1600p OLED display that is absolutely stunning. Just over 400 nits of brightness. Sadly, it's glossy, which is my one dig on this screen. I hate glossy screens, but it's the only way with these OLED panels at the moment. Whereas the Razer Blade 18 gets a 4K plus IPS screen with 500 nits of brightness that is 240Hz out of the box, but has a dual native resolution, can be switched to 1200p 440Hz. So I know instantly everyone's going to say, oh, that's terrible on a flagship laptop, you've got an IPS panel. Sadly, there is no OLED panels for 18s at the moment. They had no other option other than there's a mini LED panel they could have used, but that has a few inherent problems of its own. Now, having used both these laptops for quite some time now, obviously image quality looks far, far better on the Blade 16. You cannot beat that OLED goodness. It looks incredible. It's incredibly responsive, being an OLED, and 240Hz, but the glare I do find really annoying. Now, the Blade 18 has this 4K plus display, which still for an IPS screen looks very, very good. The blacks are actually pretty impressive. It's one of the best IPS panels I've actually used. You definitely can see the difference in image quality compared to the OLED, but for an IPS, I'm really pleased with it. And I have been using the dual switching and regularly switch to 1200p for long-term gaming sessions at 440Hz high refresh. I thought it was going to be a gimmick, but I've really enjoyed it. But what I particularly enjoy about using this laptop over the Blade 16 is just having the matte display. No glares. I live in a very bright house. The studio is very bright. The glare on the OLED panel can get quite distracting at times. I really can see my reflection in this screen, whereas I do prefer the matte that I have on the actual 18. Now I wish someone out there would make these OLED displays with matte panels. That would then be, in my use case, absolutely perfect. Now up above the screens, both of these laptops have webcams which look and sound like this. And this is a test of the webcam and the microphones on the new 2025 Razer Blade 16. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the quality of the picture and the sound. This is a test of the webcam on the Razer Blade 18 2025 edition. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think this looks and sounds like. Hopefully this is a bit of an upgrade, but webcams on laptops are usually pretty rubbish. And then both of these laptops have Windows Hello IR facial recognition for the best way of logging into Windows, in my humble opinion. Now, the one difference with the webcams and setups on both these laptops is this year, the Blade 18 actually gets a camera shutter, so you can shut your webcam off for the privacy conscious above us, but the Blade 16 does not. Now, last year, it was the other way around. There wasn't one on the 18 and there was one on the 16, so I don't know what's going on over at Razer. So now we've looked around both of these laptops. Let's shut them down, crack them open and take a look inside. So opening these laptops is incredibly easy. Just grab a decent Torx driver. Now I use a set from iFixit that has never let me down, and I will put that in the description down below. With the screws removed, carefully lift off the panels. Starting with the batteries, the Blade 16 gets a 90 Wh battery and the Blade 18 gets a slightly larger 99 Wh battery. Now the Razer Blade 18's battery also has a fan in the centre, which should help keep the fan temp in check on the battery. Now this should hopefully give the battery cells a longer life. Both laptops have two M.2 SSD bays with Gen 4 drives installed. Now both of these laptops have plenty of clearance under the drives, meaning that double-sided SSDs will fit, giving you a theoretical 16TB of SSD limit on each of these laptops. With regards to the RAM, and this is a clear win for the Razer Blade 18, with its two removable RAM slots populated with 32GB of 5600 mega transfers DDR5. The Blade 16, on the other hand, has soldered on RAM, 32GB of 8000 mega transfers on my model, but you can also opt for a 64GB version at a much higher cost. Both have socketed Wi-Fi 7 cards that are user replaceable, and both have a 2-fan vapor chamber cooling solution, though the Razer Blade 18's cooling solution is massive compared to the Blade 16's, and therefore it has a much higher combined crossload. So with that in mind, let's put these both back together and check out the performance. Starting with the CPU, and the Razer Blade 18 gets the new Intel 275HX, which has proven itself to be a very powerful CPU this year at the expense of power. The Razer Blade 16 gets the HX370, which is an older chip but very efficient. Also, if you buy any other GPU variant other than the 5090, you get the even worse AI365, which is very stingy move from Razer. Now starting with Geekbench 6, and we can see that both have a very similar single-core short boost performance score, but the Blade 18 has a much higher multi-core score. And when we push it with a longer 10-minute torture test of Cinebench R23, the HX370 really shows its age, with 35 less performance than the Blade 18. But the Blade 16 does have the one advantage that it actually uses 50% less wattage to do so. And in a slim light chassis, like this Blade 16, this is the right choice. Moving to gaming on these laptops, and although we can't compare like for like, as we have a 5080 and a 5090, I can tell you that the 175 watt 5080 in the Blade 18 performs very close to the lower wattage 5090 in the Blade 16. Though the 5090 does have other advantages, such as 24GB of GDDR7 and an extra video encoder for people that may buy these laptops for 3D work instead of just gaming. The Blade 16 has a 160 watt limit on that 5090 due to this slim chassis, and I have to be honest, in most of my gaming it feels actually closer to about 150 watts. The Blade 18, on the other hand, has a 175 watt limit on the 5080 and the 5090 cards, and it seems to sit at about the 170 to 175 watt, leading to really great gaming performance. Not only that, but with its thicker chassis, it can also offer much more power to the CPU whilst keeping that 175 watt TGP. We found in the turbo mode on the Blade 18, we could use 175 watt on the graphics, whilst also using just about 100 watts on the CPU at the same time. The Blade 16, on the other hand, seems to lock the CPU at about 25 watts when that GPU is fully utilised. Now, both these laptops have advanced Optimus with G-Sync panels, but sadly the Blade 16 has both the USB-C ports wired directly to the integrated graphics, meaning external displays and VR headsets cannot connect directly to the NVIDIA card. The HDMI is connected to the NVIDIA though. The Blade 18, on the other hand, has one of the Thunderbolt ports connected to the NVIDIA card as well as the HDMI. Now actually, gaming on both these laptops is a great experience, but the Blade 18 not only offers you better performance, but is also quieter than the Blade 16 in the corresponding profiles. Only the performance mode was the fan similar between these two laptops, but given the extra power given to the Blade 18 in this performance mode, this was to be expected. Now, temps were in check on both of these laptops and the palm rests remained cool with both of these units. Plus, with all of the hot air expelled out of the back of the laptops, there's no scorched mouse hands like we've experienced with the Area 51 16-inch. My conclusion is that although both game well, you'll have a much better time overall gaming on that Razer Blade 18 than you will with the 16. Though obviously the 16 is designed more to be a portable workstation that can also game. Now, moving on to battery life, and despite the Blade 18 having a larger battery, the battery life was not even close with the Blade 16. The Blade 18 gave us just over 6 hours, whereas the Razer Blade 16 a massive 10 hours in our usual streaming YouTube test over Wi-Fi at 60 Hz 200 nits. Now, both these laptops are also capable of 100 watt power delivery charging, and both performed very well here at that 100 watts. Even gaming was possible via power delivery, with the Blade 16 giving very slightly better performance than the Blade 18, probably due to that more efficient CPU. And to be honest, with these laptops, this can come in clutch, whether I want to work with my PD monitor for a one cable solution, or I just don't want to carry those massive power bricks with me when I'm out and about. And these are some big chargers with these gaming laptops. The Razer Blade 16 getting a 280 watt solution, and the Blade 18 getting a massive 400 watt monster. So there we go, that's the Razer Blade 16 versus the Razer Blade 18 2025 edition. And as you can see, Razer have gone in two completely different routes this year between the 16 and the 18. Now personally, I prefer that 18-inch big chunky powerful laptop that it can game, it can do all my video editing and hard work over the more compact Blade 16, but that's just me. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think. Would you take that portability with less power or the larger, heavier laptop with much more power? As always, put your comments down below and we'll get back to you. And thank you for watching.